would probably, since it's already built, it would be easier for you to do that. There is, I guess, from my understanding, there might be a political cost, because the way I understood it was some of those other 8 megawatts are going to Anne Arundel County Public School System. So that might be a political challenge.
Well, I don't know what the term of those agreements are, but if they're, for example, a 5-year agreement, we could very well in 5 years simply increase our the amount.
If you
we
have that
pool.
option, I would definitely recommend it.
But I mean, so that wasn't
the
factored into your calculations, though. You've assumed that 4 megawatts is all we're getting.
Yes,
from
that's
them.
correct.
Okay.
Alderman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, Caroline, Charles, Daniel, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you over the last year, even though I only saw you a couple times. But I want to particularly thank Professor Donahue and David Jarrow, Lisa Greco, Jackie Guile for supporting and working as a great team in this effort. So thank you for the recommendations, and thank you for saving us over $200,000 with your other colleagues. And I promise we'll take this very seriously and not just it be a plan on a shelf. So thank you.
Alderman Savage.
Yeah, thank you. And just echoing that, thank you very much. I was actually an employee who put together, it was nice to see some of my work up there, put together the climate action plan and the sustainability plan for the city years ago. So, you definitely have, I think, a lot of support. This is a lot to dig into, a lot of information, a lot of great information. So we'll definitely be looking at it over the course of the next few months. So, and I did have, I guess, one other question. Let's see. So in terms of the cost, did you factor in the land acquisition?
The land acquisition is not specifically stated in our overall cost,
Okay.
but in relation to the total solar investment that would need to be made, it is very small.
And for the electric vehicle purchase, did you?
We did factor in the price of the
Did you
electric
factor in
vehicles.
grant funding?
Grant funding, we tried to factor a little bit of, but we weren't 100% sure what exactly you guys would qualify for, given that you're a state entity. We do know that there are certain grants for electric vehicle charging stations, different kinds of vehicles, things like that. But our estimate actually is with you getting no grant money. So any grant money that you could get makes it more affordable.
Okay.
I want to just, Alderman Tierney.
Oh, yeah, real quickly, in your problem statement, I saw that the city of Annapolis produces approximately 500,000 tons, and then you clarified that but you stated that the Annapolis government produces 11,000 tons, which is a big delta. And the first thing that comes to mind is the Naval Academy and all of the state property buildings that are within the city limits. With that said, is it worth investigating partnering with them as far as energy in versus energy out? Perhaps, that's where a wind farm could be a solution.
I would say that's actually probably one of the better outcomes of this study. If Annapolis can set that example and get other people interested that want to follow a similar path regarding their energy needs, that would be the best possible scenario. Especially with wind farms, especially if you can bring more people on that need more electricity, it makes wind farms more and more viable as well.
Thank you.
So I want to say this is incredible, fantastic stuff. I can't believe just a conversation I had with you a year ago and then this was all been happening. I didn't realize how hard you were working. Thank you. I want to ask you about solar energy. So we have a good amount of land. We have 350 acres. Not all of it is we could transfer, but we have a good amount of land where the solar park is. I'm not sure how many acres are particularly. But will the technology improve so that there'll be more efficiency in how solar energy is generated? I mean, will we be able to trade out the current stuff that we're using? Will that be much better in 10 years where it will yield a lot more?
So from my research on how the different options with solar panels in the market right now, there are ones of varying efficiency, but as you pay for ones that are more and more efficient, the cost goes up exponentially. So as panel efficiencies are increasing, we're expecting the cost to go up, at least in the short term. One of the key parts we touched on is we want to make sure we use replaceable parts in as many of these as we can. So if new panel technology does come out or at a lower cost or something, we can easily add on or replace what we do have.
And I have a great relationship with the mayor of Cambridge, so I'm going to run this by him. But why? So you looked all around, and that was where give us some background on why that was the choice, the optimum choice?
The Cambridge site specifically, we actually looked at land that's for sale now, like actually for sale online, and we were looking for plots of land that were within that range that we needed for a realistically sized solar park. And out of those options, those 4 were the ones that we picked that actually cost the least, with Cambridge being much less than the other 3.
And can you point to other municipalities or other cities where they have that kind of arrangement where, what would there be, 30 miles, 50 miles away?
I know that, which aquarium is it?
Baltimore.
I think it's the Baltimore Aquarium actually has a similar power purchase agreement,
Okay.
where over on the Eastern Shore, they do have some kind of solar facility where they're doing something very similar to what we've described.
And it's generated, put into the grid,
Mhm.
Constellation grid, and then okay, great. Anybody else? Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Very interesting, and hopefully we'll get to put in place some of your suggestions. The city of Easton, did you look into them? Because they do have a solar park and a, what do they call their windmill field? And I think they're pretty close together. I toured it a few years ago, and I just wondered how they work side by side, or if that's a common way when you don't have a lot of land, because they only had like 3 windmills and a lot of solar panels, but
Something that we actually looked at before coming up with these final 5 options that we talked about. In theory, you could have a solar park nested with a wind farm. They don't need to necessarily be very far away from each other. What you're really looking for is for the solar park, you need to pick an area that's receiving an optimum amount of solar energy. And for wind parks, they need to be in areas where obviously, the wind blows more often and predictably. If those 2 areas intersect, you could build them right next to each other. There's nothing functionally or from an engineering perspective that prevents them from being in close proximity to each other. The question is, where do those hot zones for solar and the hot zones for wind overlap?
when you're driving east on 50, if you know what to look for, you can see them as you're driving towards, through Easton, on the left side, on the westbound side. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you all so very, very, very much. We really appreciate all the hard work you've done. And best to you as you proceed in your careers.
Maybe you'll be helping us implement this. So maybe one of you guys will come to us. Thank you so much. We're ready for the next section. We're going to give you
Again?
guess so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are you ones for the
For the APS, take it. Yeah, okay,
ones for this?
got it.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Mariana. I live in 3345 Willow Crescent Drive, Fairfax, Virginia.
My name is Jennifer Ortega. I live at 4417 Dixie Hill Road, Fairfax, Virginia.
And my name is Nicholas Albright. I live at 4332 Andy Drive, Fairfax, Virginia.
And we are the City of Annapolis Flood Mitigation Design Trade-off Study. So let me get started. We had the opportunity to come visit Annapolis when we were doing our study a couple times. One when we have the boat show, and another time just to look around the seawall. So now you also see here the Alex Haley Memorial Statue, and we'll be referring to that point of Annapolis for a lot of points of our presentation. So now going back to basics, kind of the idea, why is it flooding, right? So flood is caused by heavy rains, overflowing rivers, storm surges, melting ice of glaciers, and high tides. Well, Annapolis is experiencing semi-diurnal tides, which means that you experience 2 high tides and 2 low tides in a day. This is one of the most important parts that we're going to be looking at our study, including storm surges. Storm surges is what happened kind of in 2003 with Isabel. So that extra water elevation that is drawn through by the high winds of the storms. So now, you know, flooding in Annapolis is a thing. You haven't been experiencing it for a while. And in the past years, it has increased exponentially. So it's about predicted to be about 30.93 floods on average in a year, and 95% of them are due to tidal flooding. If you look into the picture here, this is our scoped area. So we have selected 2 points, which is the red dot right there, which is the Dingy Dock elevation, where the Alex Haley sculpture is at, and the end of Newman Street, which is an elevation of 1.80 feet NAVD, which is the vertical datum that we'll be referring our units to. You can also see the dotted line represents the current concrete seawall that is at 4.65 feet elevation. So now we did our own analysis based on the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration water levels, and we calculated that in 2018 you were experiencing about, not my phone. In 2018 you experienced about 55 days of flooding. So now kind of how is this impacting the city? So it's predicted about 38 businesses around the city dock area combined are losing $100,000 in revenue for a flooded day. So if we look back into what the city experienced in 2015, about 55 days of those, it adds up to about $5.5 million in revenue losses. And this is not even including any infrastructure damage cost. Now, if we look into what happened during Isabel, which is the highest ever experienced water elevation here at the city, was a surge height of 6.42 feet. Now, this one, the Federal Emergency Management Agency kind of estimated total damage cost for the whole county about $50 million in damages. So now we have to kind of address now why is it flooding getting worse? And this is where we come into explaining climate change. So climate change is a thing, and now we, as my colleagues have explained, CO2 and CO2 emissions are a big thing of it. So greenhouse emissions, and this is a basic chart of kind of the cause and effect relationship between climate change. So now I will expand now into the points that I want to make more emphasis into. So we'll start with precipitation. To understand why the flooding is happening in Annapolis, we have to see what is causing it really. So precipitation, it does have an effect. However, based on the analysis we have made, if you in the chart, you can see again, the red lines represent the lowest laying areas in Annapolis. And again, the dotted line is the seawall elevation. So all the points above that red line signifies a flooded day. This means that if you see, there is not really high correlation between precipitation and water elevation. So it means that even if it rains a lot, might not experience flooding. So which is why we decided to take precipitation out of our analysis. However, it's something that it needs to be looked at. For our analysis, we just decided not to look into precipitation. So for sea level rise is kind of the big thing that is happening in Annapolis. Annapolis, because of its location, is a hot spot for sea level rise. So it's predicted by 2050 to go about 2 foot increase in sea level rise, and by the end of the century, about 4 feet. I'll talk more about sea level rise later on the analysis that we made. And now if we bring together everything, storm surges, kind of what happened with Isabel, and sea level rise, just brings a higher risk of flooding. So with this, is just saying that a Category 1 storm today in the future will produce as much as damage as a Category 2. And this is just because of the high water elevation done, based on sea level rise. So now, looking into now our stakeholders for the project. If you look, the white box represents the flood mitigation system and how everything is connected. So the primary stakeholders are represented in green, which are the directly affected by the flooding, which are the residents and the business owners, including the U.S. Naval Academy. One of the big ones, the Annapolis government, and the one that has a lot of say in what gets to be built or not based on aesthetics is the Historic Preservation Commission. We also included the FEMA and the Annapolis Boat Show, which brings a lot of revenue to the city when it happens. And if it were to be flooded, that revenue wouldn't come to the government. Now, kind of our plan and the statement of work. So currently, Annapolis is kind of addressing the problem of flooding through the current mitigation problem. So this is addressing about rainfall and also addressing the fact that water from the bay is coming in and out of the city. So it's planning of doing backflow preventers that it won't allow the water to come again into the city. However, because this is also accounting for rain and not really accounting for any sea level change projections, there has to be another solution in tandem with it to work for and actually take into control every single possible flooding cause. So now we look into what the linear gap that we have. So 1,500 linear feet of unprotected area. This is around all the waterfront in City Dock. So you can see here again the 2 main lines for Newman Street and Dingy Dock areas, And you can see the seawall and the pump system. So the pump system expected level of protection is about a 3.2 feet in AVD. And for today, that's true. There is no points that is going above that yellow line. So for today's problem, that pump system will be enough. However, you're not predicting for the future. Those levels of water are just gonna predict to go up because of the sea level rise. So there is a gap between the level of protection that you currently have and the level of protection that you need. Then our problem again, this is 95% of the floods are coming because of tidal flooding. If the tidal flooding is if climate change is expected to increase the flood risk, you have to consider, when you're planning for the future, you have to consider the systemic climate change effects, which then leads us to our need to reduce the effects of flooding in lives and property. You need to design for the future, including climate change. Our seminal work, what includes our research, is gonna be a long-term threats of climate change, especially on sea level rise. We have decided that will build constraints on alternatives. We have chosen some alternatives based on the constraints built on the model we had, made cost estimates, and then do a trade-off analysis between these alternatives. As previously said, our full report will be done by May 15, and you can refer back to anything of those for more explanation on the details. So again, our project scope is gonna be 1,500 feet around the city dock area. This one's again the lowest point areas and the seawall. And then we have, with this, we kind of go into our analysis methodology. So this is, I'll briefly go into this, not really much in depth, and if you want more in depth, it will be in our final report. These are the phases that we took throughout the whole project. Let me expand a little kind of how the flood model, which is the main one that we included the climate change effects on it. So we have data, the historic data that was the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, and then we detrend this data based on the relationship that we found between sea level rise, tides, and the surges. With that, we find a future level water elevation. So that future water elevation is going to be built on the constraint of how tall your structure actually has to be to protect you from the flooding. So this is a key plot. This is a key result from our simulation overall. So again, you have the horizontal lines that will be your lowest points, Newman Street and Dingy Dock, and your seawall, which is the black dotted line. The triangle points in the graph are the observed actual max water elevations throughout 2000 and 2018. So our prediction is the green line. You can see that even those dots were above the predicted elevation that we had predicted. So elevations that high can happen. And you can also see in the chart Isabel again, which is the highest elevation that you have ever experienced, which is at 6.42, way beyond the seawall. We have, based on the preliminary results that we have of our simulation, we say that 6.67 feet in AVD 88 will be the elevation, if a surge were to occur, that will be the elevation that it could be at by 2050. So our recommended protection height, because we know there's some uncertainty with our numbers and some factors that we cannot really take into account, we have decided to go with a 4.5 feet. And now with that, with a 4.5 feet elevation and a lowest point for 1.5, we have decided to go with a structure of 3 feet. That will be enough to cover for all the necessary the things around City Dock. We also have decided that a long-term solution will be 30 to 35 years, or by the year 2050. And one thing that we always keep into consideration is the Historic Preservation Commission, that they do have an effect of how high the visual impact to the city would be. So now for our system alternatives, we'll look into 4 different alternatives. 3 of them are currently on the market. We have tiger dams, aqua fences, and self-coasting barrier. If you want more in-depth description for each of them, they are in our technical paper and the solutions for it. But I'll expand more on our own design of the dynamic pneumatic coffer dam. So the dynamic pneumatic coffer dam is taking into account this visual aspect. So it will be made to resemble a sidewalk. It will be sit on the ground, it will be held by the weight of the water and by bolts. So the width and the height and everything, it just be according to however area is available. So the standard size of a sidewalk is about 4 feet and 7.5 inches. So in the passive state, which just means when there is no flood, it will just look like a sidewalk, an aluminum sidewalk. And inside of it, it will be an airbag that will be inflated in case there's, let's see, an emergency coming for a hurricane coming. You will just inflate those bags and they will be ready for use. They can be prompted in about an hour with our preliminary analysis. Now, we compared all these alternatives based on different utilities that will yield. So we weigh them all equally. We have responsiveness, customizability, life expectancy, and aesthetics. Based on these utilities, we ranked them. And then we also we did a cost analysis on each of the alternatives based on acquisition, life cycle, and labor. Life cycle accounts for the 30-year period that we're looking at. And labor is about how many hours you will need to put up the alternatives for a search. So now in specifying more on our scope, we decided to divide into 3 sections. So one of the sections will be where the Newman Street is at, and then we have Dingy Dock, and then you have where Dock Street and Prince George Street is at. All of this together will add up to be about the 1,500 feet elevation. And then you have, with that, we calculated the cost. We have hourly wages with about $14. All of these variables can be changed in simulation. If these ones were in the correct numbers, they can just be put as variables. The total cost and the total life cycle cost, this includes the number of purchases, including the first purchase you make. So now, in a summary for all our alternatives, we have the Aquafence, the Tiger Dam, and the self-coasting barrier, and the GMU design. So the self-coasting barrier ends up to be about $4.2 million in the 30-year life cycle. But however, because this is already a permanent solution, it's on the ground and it does not require any installation time. So it just be ready for use whenever you need it. You have the Tiger Dams that will be about $450,000, and that takes about 6 hours. You have the Aquafences about $2 million, and our design ends up to being about $720,000 and 1 hour to installation. However, those are rough estimates that will still need more analysis on them. Now, when we compare the marginal utility between all our 3 structures, we found that the GMU design will have the highest utility of 0.76. You can see also that the red dot right there, 0.18, is the highest utility. But when compared to the cost, it doesn't have as a marginal result to it. So our recommendation overall is just going to protect for a 4.5 feet relative to NAVD. With that, what I have said, based on the low point, it will mean a 3-foot structure. We can also say that based on the trade-off analysis alone, you can go with the George Mason dynamic for them. But now overall, I would say the need to address climate change effects when planning to the future. There's just a need to know the climate change because it's happening now, and it's happening fast. So our solution is a symbiotic phasing of solutions. Go with the current stormwater system is necessary, but there has to be another one that will make your city more resilient to the effects of flooding. It's not a one-thing solution. So with that, I conclude my speech today. Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That was great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, all the presentations have been incredibly thorough. Let's see. At one point you're proposing, let me see if I can find that page again, electric pumps.
Well, those electric pumps are the current stormwater system.
That's the current system you were looking at. Okay. So it looks like the pumps we have currently proposed
Yes,
would essentially only buy us about 25 years.
correct. Yeah. And most of these ones are going to be in the sense when you have rainwater and then you have high water elevations, they're going to be useful. However, as I said, it kind of has to work with something else to actually work properly. The pump system is not considered any actual sea level rise. So for the current conditions, it will work. If in the future it's just sea level rise exponentially increases, it won't be enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Alderman Rodriguez.
Just thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just thank you once again. It's been incredible. And I love the long-term vision. And I think we'll have to put a budget item for the GMU dynamic. But thank you again. And really, it's been amazing. And look forward to what you continue to do in the future. So keep us up to date.
Thank you.
Alderman
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Pendel-Chelsea.
Again, thank you also very, very much, and all the best to you in your future endeavors.
Thank you.
And thank you, Alderman Rodriguez, for your support and your help in initiating this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Tierney?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm sort of lost in the cofferdam.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a civil engineer, so anyways. How deep were those going in the pneumatic cofferdams? How deep would they
Sorry.
have to go?
How deep they have to go?
Yeah.
Well, they actually are on top of the ground, so they will just be, you can place them on top of the sidewalks. It can probably be, since more, these ones are preliminary results, but the customizability of them right now can be done to any elevation, and the angle would just be dependent on whatever elevation you want to reach. So they can go just bolted in top of the sidewalks, and that would just be like a hidden cofferdam.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
So you seal it underneath. I've never seen that cofferdam, the pneumatic dam before. It's the first time I've seen something like that before. We've
Yeah,
seen
most
the
of-
other.
Yeah,
Most of the
me
cofferdams
too,
are water inflated. The difference with this cofferdam is like air inflated, which also makes it faster to be put up than when you need it. Yeah.
And so if it's 4 feet, it's a 4 feet expansion, but you seal the base, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, if I
Yes.
could add some points. The pneumatic cofferdam is actually a new concept. We're actually looking at patenting this, and it needs more detailed design, but we're looking for venture capitalists. Basically, in next year, I
Ross-
expect to do more
Ross
detailed, a more detailed design to actually take it to market, because we think there's a
He'll be
lot of
very
market for
popular in
this.
Eastport if he does that.
But it does go on top of sidewalks, and so as opposed to some of the other systems that you have to trench, which are very nice, okay, but they're very permanent and they're very expensive to put in. This could also have about a 30-year life. And if you think of an aluminum floating dock, which is what gave me the idea in the first place, this is basically like an aluminum floating dock with an airbag inside and one side being hinged. It could be inflated by compressors from a truck very rapidly, permanently installed, and it just looks like a sidewalk, a little bit higher sidewalk than what you currently have.
There you go, Gavin, a 50-foot-long section at the bottom of New.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alderman Annette.
So we're looking forward to you coming back and studying the other side of the bridge in Eastport, which has a much more irregular shoreline.
That would increase the scope of the study, and we had to be able to size this to what 4 people could do in 8 months.
But it does raise the question, because Eastport is a problem in many ways, but in this regard, because we have docks and a very irregular shoreline. But we do pay the second largest amount of property taxes in the
Right.
city. So I think we might be worth a look at to say.
Right. And of course, a lot of that is private property, so it's easier if you think of city-owned property, but when you start going across private property, then the negotiations just become a more interesting and complex issue.
But I can guarantee those residents would like to stay dry.
So I think personally, as an engineer, I think there's a market for this, and it's very buildable, and I think next year what I'd like to do is design and build prototypes and do prototype testing, and specifically find venture capitalists and a manufacturing partner to market.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I'd also like to talk a little bit about storm surges. How much more frequent do you expect those to be? Was that part of your study? I mean, we've seen these catastrophic events happening all over the country. So is there an analytic of how much that's increased in the last 10 or 20 years or so?
Well, that's outside of scope. We did do research on how the storms are kind of moving. However, there is not really that much of empirical results to actually show how they're going to be in the future, which is why we just say kind of the expected elevation if they were to occur, not when they will occur. Yeah.
If I might add, when the storm surge comes in, and I think that's your biggest threat, which we've seen, your current pumping system that you're looking at putting in, which we endorse, we think that's a good thing to do, but once the water starts running into the wells from City Dock, you're just pumping water around, okay? I mean, you're basically got no place to pump to. So until you put up a barrier that prevents the backflow coming on over the seawall or around the seawall, that system becomes ineffective.
We know that system would fail with an Isabel. So what I wonder is, when is the next Isabel? I mean, this is...
One could protect for an Isabel event, but it's would be a very expensive system, and it's going to be relatively rare. So there's a trade-off analysis is, when do you try to prevent the most probable storm surge events at 4.5 feet? That should be a pretty good design point. But if you want to prevent an Isabel, you're going to need to have storm barriers that are significantly higher, and your current seawall is inadequate and would have to be increased by 2 plus maybe 3 feet. Then you have a historic preservation society issue.
Any other questions? Alderman Savage, yeah?
Yeah, thanks. So with the system you've been proposing here, is this complementary to the pump solution that we're currently looking at, or could this work without the pump solution, or they require each other?
It will be complementary. I think there's still when you're flooding in the city, it's coming through the storm drains too. So if you don't fix the storm drains, you will have flooding inside the city. Although you're covering the water that is coming through the bay, you're still having to experience that flood through the storm drains. So it is actually something that goes with it.
We have a short-term solution. Ellie, do you want to talk a little bit about that or not? No.
It's pretty lame. We're just plugging up the storm. We have 3 storm lines on the north side that we're just going to plug up with some. We're going to hopefully plug up with some bladders, and then have 3 and just pump it back out. It's just a pumping loop system.
And then on the compromised street side, we're going to try to build up that low point there if we can. We will look into if we can. And so there's 4 offending storm drains that really cause our most major problems. So we've had some experts come in and say, well, let's try to just plug them completely, because the water doesn't come over the top of the new seawall, so it comes across to Alex Haley. But we think that we can have a short-term solution where we know that the flood mitigation plan we have currently is a midterm solution, and then this council will work to the long-term solution as well.
Yeah, so it will have submersible pumps.
Okay, yeah.
So just plug, pump in the back, it pumps over the stormwater over the top, and then stops the tidal water coming in, So. Thank you so much. It's excellent work. It's amazing. So can I get your number from Mark? So can I get your cell number from Mark? I owe you a pint at least. So. The most expensive pint you've ever had.
How's your basketball team? How's your basketball team this year? They made the. What
Been
happened?
working too hard on this project.
God, that was like just a few years ago.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. So Mark, will you share his number? He's a resident, right? So, I think I met him at the first open house when he first
We're
came
going to
in.
do the comp plan in half an hour. Oh, good, in station left. She's on mic.
Yeah. Lisa, they're all awesome. Welcome them right in, showed all the information on the data.
I'm still doing one. Yeah, I've got to do one movie, so after 6:30. Or so. Have you been to something?
Only once in a while, though.
You feeling all set?
There you go.
Didn't work, so you said that.
City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is ID 418-19, City's Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Sally Nash, Department of Planning and Zoning.
Pete Gowald, former Director of Planning and Zoning.
Not yet.
You know how to make a joke out of
The traitor.
Soon to be former.
With us this afternoon is members of our Planning Commission who will come up in just a minute. But the Chairman, Bob Waldman, Vice Chair is Ben Sales, and former past Chairman, Bill Harold. Behind them sitting is one of our consultants, is Chris Chubiak, as one of our consultants, and he is a veteran of doing planning in the city of Annapolis. what I want to start off with, and then Sally will take the lead on, is sort of describe what we wanted to do here today, what we wanted to accomplish.
And by the way, Pete, you can say whatever you want now, right?
Yeah, I know.
I can too.
But to set out a path, describe where we want to go, and get sort of a consensus and a direction, sort of a nod of the head, because we'll come back. Part of this, what we've developed, or at least what I was thinking when I thought I would be here, was, as many of you may know, we got thrown a curveball when we started off on this process. So we reassessed, evaluated our resources, and then came up with a game plan to move forward with doing the comprehensive plan, utilizing those resources, and also based on lessons learned from doing since I've been here at least, doing sector studies. So the reassessment and the reevaluation of maximizing our resources was to sort of do it internally, but hire a number of experts, if you will, consultants on specific subject matters. Chris Chubiak being one of the main experts and professionals to guide us through much of the putting the document together and walking us through. We also decided to take from lessons learned that we want to include as many partners as possible. We have a typical process of including the public participation, but part of the things that we've learned is a lot of times, at least what I've seen, is that the Planning Commission sees the document towards the end of the process. The City Council also all of a sudden starts seeing the document at the end of the process. So we want to start including you at the beginning of the process and all the way through. Much of what Dan needs, I felt like he was stealing my ideas yesterday, is saying we're coming back to you on a regular basis. But it's not just us. It's going to be the Planning Commission, who is your citizens' liaisons to dealing with this on these types of matters and making recommendations to you at that point in time. So we've reassessed and sort of identified how we can move this through the process, everybody being informed the whole way through the process so there are no surprises at the end of the game. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Sally to talk about sort of the concepts of what we've established. But more importantly, I want sort of, when we put together this procedure or when we talk about our process, is certainly if there are comments or directions that you think we're going in the wrong direction, or if there's something we need to add, I need to know that, or we need to know that. Well, Sally needs to know that. Let me just put it that way. Because I really was thinking about this and how we would do this so there was no surprises along the way. So if we all agree today that this is the process and the procedure that we'll utilize, and we have buy-in, we get to move forward and start getting this thing kick-started. So with that said, I'll turn it over.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to give a brief presentation because I want the Planning Commission to have a chance to talk to you and for you to hear each other. I also wanted to thank Patrick Hughes from Anne Arundel County Long Range Planning for coming today. He is on our technical committee, which is a staff committee, and we work closely on a variety of plans and studies. And the county is also starting their GDP, their comp plan they call the GDP. And so I went to their kickoff session last Saturday. Two events coming up too is May 2nd, Planning Commission is going to be talking a little bit more in detail about the comp plan, and May 7th we have our first public meeting. So this is a little bit what I'm going to cover today, some of the basics, planning, zoning, and what a comprehensive plan is. But first, the Planning Commission, as you probably know, Diane Butler couldn't, and George Matthews and Alex Pine couldn't make it today, or David Imes. So we have Robert Wellman, Chair, Bill Harold, and Ben Sale. So what is planning? I know that we got tripped up a lot on this word, what is a plan, for the Forest Drive Eastport sector study. Causes some confusion because you think, like, if I'm going to plan a vacation, I'm going to buy my airplane tickets, I'm going to make my hotel room reservation, and I'm going to, pack my bag. And so absent some kind of emergency, that's what's going to happen. But for land use planning, a plan is more of what we want to happen, not what is definitely going to be happening. The plan helps us allocate our resources. We have a lot of competing goals in this community, every community, and the plan helps us balance those goals. It has to be flexible, though, because there's a lot of things beyond our control, like the actions of other jurisdictions. And the plan doesn't change anything by itself. It has to be implemented. And one way to implement it is by starting with our goals, agreeing on those, getting consensus on that, thinking of, so goal is a broad guiding principle, then coming up with, so one example, is like improving traffic safety. It's just a general goal. We want to improve traffic safety, not really specific, just overarching. Then the performance measure is a more specific metric. A strategy is then an approach or a policy to help implement the goal. So your strategy for improving traffic safety might be something like eliminate hazardous or substandard conditions where there are many high crash locations. So you're getting a little bit more specific. And then the performance measure is the specific metric you use to assess the progress towards achieving this goal. So the metric could be something like decrease the number of pedestrian vehicular crashes. And then the target is the specific number that goes with the performance measure. You decrease the number of crashes from 20 to 10 or whatever the number is. It's just an illustration to say that's how the plan gets more and more specific and helps guide implementation actions in the future.
So this is a graphic that I tend to use a lot, and it kind of hits home, so it's been successful. We'll see if it works this time. No, I'm just kidding. I look at a comprehensive plan concept through a concentric circle, and the core of your circle is your land use element, and everything feeds into that. So what do you want the land use to be? How do you want it to be organized? What are the intensity levels of those? Not necessarily the zoning, but what are the intensities of the land use is going to be? What type of land use would it be? Commercial, industrial, residential? These are the types of things that is the core of your concept of a comprehensive plan. Go to the next one, please. So what feeds into that core plan are the elements of those plans. You could be your master water and sewer plan. It would be environmental planning. It will be housing. It will be all these sensitive areas, transportation, historic preservation. These elements feed into what it is you're trying to accomplish based on that land use plan. They will be a series of strategies, recommendations, and policies that you've established in each one of these levels. Go to the next one. In each one of these levels. So they feed that core plan. Then your final outer ring of your concentric circle is your implementation. You don't necessarily get into the design of a specific road improvement or pedestrian access, but what you do is that you set the policy of where these should be, where they are as in your priority, and where they should be implemented. The implementation strategies are your development regulations. They would be your zoning text, they would be your zoning codes, they would be your road codes, they would be your building codes. Certainly zoning map. Your zoning map would also dictate what types, that'll get more specific as to the intensity and the type of development that would be permitted in that area. Capital improvement program certainly is an implementation. If it's looking for fundings for that priority or that program or that strategic goal, that strategy or recommendation that you've identified in any of those policy elements that you've, in that inner core and outer core of the element plans are feeding into. Certainly economic development and community development, where you're going to spend your money, how you're going to make those public-private partnerships. They all are implementations where you're finding those mechanisms to implement those goals and strategies. I really want to focus on, this sort of graphic, if you will, to help everybody understand what the level of information and the level of strategies that you're going to put together, because they follow sequentially, but they all feed into one another. Sure.
Is there still another ring, like you say, zoning? The last zoning map I have in hard copy is from 2005. I don't think in the last comprehensive plan we changed the zoning map.
The zoning map is the implementation. So what you should be doing is setting out the land use.
Well, that's why I'm saying.
In the comprehensive plan.
Ring.
I'm sorry?
This is the implementation ring.
Correct.
So zoning map, changing zoning code, financing.
These are separate actions that happen separately from your comprehensive plan. What would happen is that you would adopt the land use piece of it and the strategies associated with the element plans. The implementation is like your capital improvement program, your zoning map. I've always talked about the next phase of the recommendations out of this comprehensive plan should be a comprehensive zoning review of your maps.
So is that still another ring outside of these 3 rings?
No, that third ring is the procedures and actual practical implementation of those goals, policies, and strategies that Sally said are embedded in your plan.
Okay. So hearkening to the Forest Drive sector study and the Appendix E, which I think is a huge step forward on implementation, and at the risk of the next step outside of that is, and we just talked about it this morning, linking the plan, the planning document to the capital improvement program. So that the forest sector study talked about solutions, problem solutions, and the funding for those are outside of, that's why I say I think there's another.
To me, that
circle.
is that outside, that implementation is that outside ring. The comprehensive plan is the 2 inner rings, and that outside ring is now feeding that comprehensive plan. You know, I would, there's one thing you can do, and other jurisdictions have done this, as you look at your capital improvement program, and I think you guys do this as part of the ranking, is how does this accomplish your comprehensive plan? Because remember, comprehensive plan is not just the Department of Planning and Zoning or the Planning Commission. It's the city's plan. So when you're looking at funding mechanisms, and one of the questions should be, how is this implementing your comprehensive plan?
Yeah.
Or any plan for that matter. It could be your master water and sewer plan. It could be your historic preservation plan. It could be any of those other elements. So.
And I'm trying to think of the rating scale. I don't think it's in there. Is it one of the
The
scores?
working committee does score the projects on whether they implement policies or goals of the comprehensive plan and other strategic plans.
All right, so my feeling, and one of the comments I'll make on the sector study is, you can have the best plan in the world. If you don't do the things that you need to do, pay for, in implementation, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people. This was the point I was trying to make the other night at the Transportation Committee, and you made the valid return point, Sally, was once you pass the sector plan, then we can get into more detailed planning. But it's the mitigation of the impacts. All plans, even good plans, are going to have some negative impacts that have to be addressed and taken care of. More traffic on the road, or this is great if you really do complete streets.
Everything's a
where you have
balancing
bicycles.
act. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, all right. Thank you.
Sure, and just to follow up on that comment about what is zoning, it's the law that controls land use. There's 2 main kinds, Euclidean and form-based zoning, and we will be talking about those more as we move through the process. But it's also important to remember that zoning is both the text, you know, our Title 20, 21, 22, and the map as well. So, what is a comprehensive plan? Broad statement about the community looking 20 years ahead, looks at goals and strategies to achieve those goals. And for this one, we're focusing on how we can ensure healthy communities, healthy economies, and healthy environments. A lot of the content components of the plan are dictated by state of Maryland law, and there is a new affordable housing element, actually, that was just passed this session, so we will need to add that as well. Our comprehensive plan logo is Annapolis Ahead, bridging barriers, connecting communities. If you look, our webpage is up and explains this is the welcome to the ABCs of planning. All right, so now I want to give you a chance to talk to the Planning Commission, and ideally I'd like you to work through the process of the comp plan. I have a proposed model. I'd like you to talk about your goals for the city in the next 20 years and what opportunities and challenges the city faces up in the upcoming years. So I'm going to turn the slide to my proposed process and invite the Planning Commission up to the table.
Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you so much.
Well, after this game of musical chairs, I got one.
Exactly.
Pete, you're out.
To Baltimore.
I don't know.
Don't leave me because you're next.
What I wanted to, what we want to chat with you about are a few things, 3 things. What's the process going to be so that when I ask you we go into the second item of discussion, which are what are our goals in all of this? Your goals, our goals, everybody's goals. You can understand how to fit it into the process that we're proposing. And the third thing is opportunities and challenges. In other words, if we could talk a little frankly about what some of the opportunities are, what some of the difficulties are going to be, I think it would be healthy. So let me go back to the beginning. Process. One of the things I think that this Forest Drive sector study has been very, very helpful in that it's gotten everybody, the council, thinking about what is planning. What is a study? What is a plan? And thinking about getting involved in where's the city going? Where do we want it to go? What are its weaknesses? What are its strengths? And how do we respond to that? And I think it's been really helpful. I think the controversy has been really helpful, and everybody has learned a lot from it. So I'm very hopeful. I think that much of the data that was in that study will be incorporated and so forth. The process that we are proposing is that we keep you informed as we go along, meaning we also want feedback as we go along. So it may be that at every work session, we get 15 minutes or the staff gets 15 minutes or whatever we need to just keep you up to date. Not to inundate you with information and data and more to read and so forth and so on, but at least keeping you up to date. And possibly, as we come upon things that are relevant to each one of your wards, we may want to focus more specifically personally on those specific issues. So to get us kind of started on that, so that we don't at the end come up with some sort of finished product that nobody's familiar with, and then therefore there's a great deal of resistance. We want to incorporate you. We want to hear from you. We've already heard from some of you who have taken the time to write things down as to what's in your mind. You can send us stuff in writing if you're comfortable with writing, and it can be free association. It does not need to be a finished memorandum. If you would like to come and talk with us and schedule some time with the commission and just get off your chest what it is that you think is important to your ward or to the city as a whole, hey, we're available. We can meet in a conference room. It doesn't need to be a public hearing. It should just be a meeting, just talk. You know your wards better than anybody else. And so now is the time to begin to feed us what it is you want as you look forward. You know whether a bicycle path should be or shouldn't be. You know what kind of housing there should be or shouldn't be. You've thought about employment. You've thought about environment. You've thought about a lot of the things. We're familiar with some of the things that you think about, but you need to get that. You need help us to articulate so that it gets into the plan. Okay. Specifically with respect to housing, which is one of the new requirements that we should address, and which several of you have mentioned, housing issues in the city, and specifically what I'm going to call workforce housing, or the missing middle. I'm not talking about more of, if I got my definitions straight, affordable housing is government-supported housing, and MPDU is workforce housing. In other words, it's kind of market rate kind of housing. And if you think that's the missing middle, then you need to articulate that for us, okay? As to what we should do. I have proposed that we have we'll set up a work session, bring in a few people who know the MPDU law, can compare it to other jurisdictions and what some of the possibilities are, and then once again, an informal meeting, learn what it's about, because in the end, you implement things, not us. All we can do is incorporate this and begin to give you a map. You're the ones who are going to write MPDU legislation. You're the ones who are going to write environmental laws. You're the ones who are going to write about land use. Okay? Okay? We just want to get this in, and we want to get it done, and we want to get it done efficiently, and I mean quickly, because when I get to challenges, I'm a little worried about things. So when we talk about land use, before I finish with the process point of this, when we talk about land use, and I think there was a major misconception in the Forest Drive study, and that all of Eastport would become urban low commercial village center, or whatever we called stuff, okay? That's not what we were recommending, and it's our fault for not having made it clear. We want you all to focus in on very specific places that should be, could be, might be developed a little more, and we can talk about some opportunities rather than, frankly, a chicken store and gas station. What would be better on that corner but perhaps a 3-story building, 2 stories of workforce housing above, a story of commercial activity below, which frankly, and we will be happy to provide you with data, provides more employment than a big franchise gas station operation, okay? That's the kind of land use decisions that we need you to begin thinking about. Goals for the city. Grow where we need, and we can't grow out anymore, so we're going to have to grow up in certain places. Grow where we need to, and protect where we must. So there'll be many places in this city that see absolutely no changes to the land use designations, but there are a few other places that might.
Whatever you just said, you've got to say it again. Grow where, say that again. That's your tagline.
Should have been in advertising.
No, I mean, that's really important.
Grow where we need to.
Thank you.
And protect where we must.
I love that. Don't you love that?
No.
Oh, God.
And this is one of the things that I'll say in my comments
Protect
on the
as
Forest
we
Drive
must.
sector study. It is a study, but it's also a proposal. And it's proposing one concept, which is changing community character, and it seems like it's changing community character to grow up, as you just said. That's not the only alternative. And so the first question I want to ask is, why do we need to grow? And I think there are valid reasons, but I think we need to ask ourselves that first. Before we ask where, we need to ask why. It's a dialogue I started with Sally a few minutes ago, which is what is development and why do we develop? And
Okay.
Presumably we develop because we need to satisfy some need.
Ross, can you get close to the microphone there?
We never propose, that's Forest Drive Sector Study does not propose changing Eastport designation. What it does is provide an opportunity to change certain selected areas in Eastport, for instance.
I
Do you follow me?
understand that. And believe me, I'm not Eastport-centric for this exercise. I think the comprehensive plan is important to the quality of life for everybody in the city.
One of the major reasons I think you're seeing a plus up for what you would say is more of a growth for Forest Drive than elsewhere. There was a slide given on the first presentation you had today which shows the population growth versus number of households. The households are actually growing in number massively. I'm sorry, not growing in number massively versus the population. So you have a lot more density. So a big push, and it's something we found from our researchers that the city paid for during the Forest Drive sector study, is obviously a need for housing. Because you have a lot of people trying to cram into condos or homes because there just isn't enough housing out there. So that's part of the reason you see a push for maybe a growth in that and the structures on Forest Drive. But I'm with you. It is hard to find, I think it's hard to look at a planning and zoning department around the state that wants to look at, hey, let's slow down and reduce. It almost seems like every department that I've talked to, when I've gone to these conventions, I've gone for the commission twice in the last 2 years, it's always on how do we accomplish accommodating the growth? How do we grow more to meet this growth? Nobody's really, that I've seen, saying, hey, you know, let's slow it down and let's tone it down. In our existing land use, that's for the actual planning and zoning departments, not commissions as a whole.
But I think a lot of us are saying that, and I think I spent my adult life in a planned community called Columbia, Maryland, which was providing the supply and generated the demand. And I was just back there visiting some high school friends, and I hate the place now. I loved it when I moved there, but I can't stand it. It's ugly. Everything is walled in, tall buildings. I don't want to see that happen to us.
I think we have misled you a little bit. We're interested in getting the council to think about identifying goals, and I think it's premature for us to be jumping into a growth debate as sort of. I think that's
sooner or later.
I think it's sooner or later, sure. But I think from the standpoint of what we'd like to ask you to do immediately is to think about your ward or parts of the city that you're familiar with, and just have a short list about, I think we need to have more places like this and fewer places like that. Just something that simple that helps us to understand a little bit about what you like about this community or what you think we need a little bit more of, whether that's bigger, smaller, greener, wetter. We are a waterfront city, after all. Let's just think about what it is that you would like to see more of or less of. And that helps us, that gives us a direction that we can then build on. And I don't think that the answer to that is more means growth and less means we're all cotton farmers. I think it just gives us a sense of what kind of a city do you think your ward would like to be part of 20 years from now, because that's the time frame that we're talking about. So maybe simplify it a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to keep it to the presentation here because
Yeah.
Fred and I have to be in Bloomsbury Square at 5. So.
Oh, good.
So.
Yeah.
So what they're asking for is our ideas. We can present those ideas. So that's an idea. No growth. That's an idea, right? So.
Yes.
Alderman Savage hasn't had a chance to talk yet, so I'm going to.
I understand now's not the time to have these debates, but I do think it's worth mentioning when you look at the 2009 comp plan, I think it's worth talking at some point, what are our primary goals overall? Like the 2009 comp plan, preserve and enhance community character, maintain a vibrant economy, and promote a green Annapolis. Those are the three primary pillars. So I think we do, at some point, need to talk about that, because I kind of subscribe, I'm more along a steady state economy, steady state growth than I am perpetual growth. I think there are different parts of the city that can afford to go up, some that can't. But I also, some of the kind of broader issues, I'd like to see us look at what kind of infrastructure assessments need to get done to help us plan for development. That doesn't necessarily mean growth, it could mean redevelopment. For example, road infrastructure. I think the sector study did take a number of large steps in that direction, but I think we need to get the proper order in terms of not having the cart before the horse. We need to get some of that. So road infrastructure, I think we can tie it with some of our watershed implementation plan in terms of our infrastructure, our natural infrastructure. We've got the school piece, which we'll be talking, well, we probably won't have time, I guess, to talk about the school.
And you guys can continue if you want. No, Brenda and I can go.
Well, you have one of the key updates we need for that. You have information we need.
I just don't want us to debate the comprehensive plan.
So those are some of the issues. And in terms of, I think you mentioned process as well. And just my 2 cents is I want to thank you. I think that's a great idea to have continual updates with us. I know my constituents would love that as well. But I would like to, I think both bodies could benefit from having, kind of taking the same approach with at least for our council, taking that approach with the constituents. Maybe we need to look at having public hearings throughout the process to get our input. Maybe it's through town hall meetings that are assisted by planning and zoning and something like that. But I also think the planning commission could benefit from that, because I know with the sector study, and maybe this is inaccurate, but at least there was the perception when I attended that you had the public hearing in one night and then there was the vote in the same night. And I think the public has expressed the desire, at least my constituents, of wanting to get involved, not just with the council, but with the planning commission and have a continual dialogue. So I think if we can both work on trying to incorporate the public
so
throughout the
it's
process.
periodic points along the way begin to float ideas. Okay,
Yeah.
I got you. Let me go back half a step, though.
Okay.
You have some things which you think should be included, and you mentioned about 4 or 5 of them right now. Do us a favor, write them down. You could even write them by hand, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that we have these ideas in mind.
Will do.
You want me to keep moving along?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Linda would just want to say something, and we are running the show, so we can design what we want to design. If it's town halls, all those sorts of things, we have.
Yes, I agree. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
I also want.
Sorry. No.
I want you to fantasize. 20 years in the future, there are going to be electric cars, there could be shuttle vans around the city, there could be all different kinds of transportation that resolve some of our transportation issues. Regional buses that run to the major employers in the Washington and surrounding Washington areas and so forth. Things that get people to work at Jessup, things that get people to work at the airports. I want you to be thinking about those kinds of things as well. Fantasize out. This is a fast-changing world, and we want to think about some mechanisms that help us get there. I'm going to move on to what I consider...
Can I just make a quick comment? I'm sorry, I have to get this off my chest. And that is that in the years
What are we going to do, fire you?
Well, yeah, exactly. No, I can say whatever I want. In the years I've been involved in comprehensive planning, my experience is that the folks most involved in it are probably over 40, often over 50. And the likelihood of getting the 20s and the people in their 20s and 30s involved is hard because they're focused on other things. But I would love to see more of an outreach to those who are going to be living this vision. We may not even be here, so we ought to hear what the young folks would like to see in their communities.
And how do we
go on Facebook, go on Twitter, get to them the way they read.
I just wanted to, Bob, can I jump in real quick? I just wanted to say we are definitely trying to do that. And if you have any ideas, let us know. But we are doing outreach on Twitter, and we're considering. The county has a student representative on their Citizens Advisory Committee, so we were thinking we would try to work with, have a similar arrangement. Although, before I know the mayor has to leave, before you want to go, I just want to make sure we're all good with this process as I've outlined here. It's sort of a 4-step process. Identify the goals, identify strategies, performance measures, and targets, confirm those, and then start drafting the document. We're planning to use the Planning Commission as our sounding board, as our citizen committee, to guide us through the process and to liaison with the public, as well as the various public outreach things we're going to be doing, like surveys, meetings, and many meetings in many formats, big public meetings, but also smaller community association meetings. So if we have buy-in on that process, then we'll get going. And but that was basically one thing I really wanted to make sure I heard today.
And Dr. Nash, do you have the rough number of outreach meetings we had with the public from the Forest Drive sector study?
We had 40.
40.
40?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay. Alderman Pindell Charles.
Mr. Mayor, quickly, Mr. Waldman was very involved in the Upper West Street sector study. We had a 3-day charrette at Mount Olive Life Center. We had over 200 folks. We went through the whole 9 yards, and our community was extraordinarily satisfied with how that process evolved. And I would suggest that process and that format be used in whatever fits your ward. But that worked tremendously well for us. Would you agree, Mr. Waldman?
Well, at one level, you're our community meeting.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
A couple of things to think about as you feed us the ideas, and then I'm going to cut myself off.
Okay.
If there are places that need to be downzoned, I want you to think about that. If there are places that need to be upzoned, I want you to think about that. If there needs to be a master plan in a place like West Annapolis, which is going to be seeing a tremendous amount of pressure, perhaps that is a way to go. But we need to, you need to sit down, you need to think about it, you need to communicate it to us. Make some decisions as we go along, because time is running out. Having said that,
Alderman Finlayson, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Where are the community groups? If I remember last time, we did the comp plan, and I was early on the council, so it was what, 07, 08 for the final 09. And I remember lots of community involvement and participation. So where in this process do you solicit support and committees and the like from the community?
Each step would have a series of public outreach events, planning commission meetings, city council work sessions, surveys, within each step before we proceed to the next step.
Two more things up.
We would go through that list of our outreach.
It's not the community groups who are working to write this comp plan, but that falls squarely on the shoulders of the planning commission?
I'm not sure.
to write it?
Yeah. I mean, to write it for us, but are you the committee? With our
Right.
input, everybody else's?
They're the committee, yes.
Okay.
And we
That is-
obviously had the Faux group, the Fox group, I'm sorry, I mispronounced that, spelled like faux in French, but they were contracted to develop the research and get that for the Forest Drive sector study, but yes.
So that's the methodology we use for the Forest Drive sector study, and we're proposing the same methodology in that they are our committee.
Okay.
But the current comprehensive plan, as we all can recall, was a disaster beyond disasters. I've never been in a project where we had a fatality.
Right.
So we hope this one goes smoother and
5 seconds.
get you something much faster.
I'm hoping that you can help us find a way to make some compromises on what's best. Because just listening around the dais today, it's going to be hard to come up with any common goals. And so I don't know how we get to that middle point with something that we can all live with. Ultimately, that's what is needed, there's no question. How we get there, we need some
Interestingly
guidance.
enough, what I'm finding is that when people speak singly, not in public, but when they speak singly, that many goals are very similar. Housing has cropped up from several of the older people that we've gotten stuff from. So that's what I'm really recommending, that you just sit down and kind of think about what you want.
Start it.
Right.
And Sally,
Let's not worry about, at this point, let's not worry about
Okay.
that yet. Let's just get going and see where we go, because I think you're going to, okay.
Okay.
I'm ever hopeful.
and Sally, this is the last slide. Is that the last slide? Yeah. Okay, 5 seconds and 5 seconds,
Just
right?
5 seconds. I mean, objectives are based on assumptions, and do not lose sight of the fact that one of the major lessons learned was losing the message of the Forest Drive sector study, and the public voice clearly at the end was no growth. Okay, so you have to be able to answer, or we have to all agree on the assumption. You have to be able to answer Ross's question, why do we need to grow? You don't want that to kill you at the end.
One of the
Don't
things
you-
I've been recommending is we've hired an economic consultant.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask the commission to articulate the questions we want from this consultant. What are the fiscal consequences of growing? What brings better tax income or not? Those kinds of very basic, fundamental 101 questions. And if you have questions that you think should be brought out, just like that question, why growth and what happens, write it down.
So guys, can you write this all down? Ross is going to say something for 5 seconds, and if you have some questions, just pass those questions on, please.
Just
Thank you.
very quickly, I want to point out that I asked help from Pete Gutwald on downzoning in Eastport, and the next day he announced he was leaving.
Sally, do you want to wrap it up? Thank you. Yeah.
No, I just want to thank you all for coming today and thank the Planning Commission for attending. We're excited to start working on this comprehensive plan.
Thank you to the Planning Commission.
And I want to
Thank you.
thank you for the thankless work that you do. City Attorney, next item on the agenda.
Oh, I thought you were going to adjourn. The next item on the agenda is 0818, adequate public facilities, adequate school facilities standards.
Pete.
We don't, yeah, how you going to get somewhere at 5 o'clock?
So, a planning commission, are you guys going to talk on adequate public facilities at all or not? No? I have that on the agenda. No?
Nah, just
No?
forget it. Forget it.
Okay, we'll leave that off.
It's a decision you need to make.
Yeah.
Affect what happens.
Okay, no worries.
Doesn't have anything to do with the
And
building.
then,
Mr. Mayor,
yes.
that was put on by, I think, one of the sponsors, or all the sponsors.
Of the ordinance.
Adequate public
the pending
facility.
ordinance.
We just, not the planning commission.
Okay.
So, I mean, we've been long asking to have a discussion as the council. We don't have enough time if you're leaving, but can you at least give us an update on what you, because I think last we left, you said you were going to work with the county and figure out and coordinate with Councilwoman Rodvian and I think even the delegates.
Alice Kane.
Yeah, and delegates. And so what have you learned?
Linda, do you want to talk it through or not?
Of the conversations had with the county?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do, in essence, is mirror the county in as much as we can, and I'll let Teresa elaborate on it, but make an allowance for the kids that come into the school from out of the jurisdiction, because we believe they add 10% or a certain amount to the capacity of the school. So try to get as close to this county as we can, but with an allowance for the fact that we don't control the kids that come from out of the school, and that we are a victim of the success of the schools. And this is just the high school, because the redistricting has worked for everything else, but redistricting is not really on the table. I just was with Olato last week. It's not on the table. A new high school is not on the table. A new site for a new high school is not on the table. So none of that is possible. So what we've tried to do is get close to them, but make an allowance for the fact that we bring in a lot of kids from out of the city. Alderman Arnett.
So as the initiator of the legislation, and it was prompted when the county came up with legislation changing their criteria, and they went down to 95%. I think now they're on the way back to 100%. But building a new high school isn't the only solution. So for me, I'm willing to, I wanted initially to just say the city was going to use the same standards as the county does. I was told, no, we can't do that. We have to put in specific numbers. If we do what the county's doing, there's no winners and there's no losers. But that doesn't mean that we don't have Annapolis High School get closed. But there's other solutions in building more space at the high school. The county, and this is why it's so important to work with the Board of Education, has all of these extracurricular programs, which is true, bring kids into the Annapolis High School. There are also city kids that go to other high schools where there's other programs. And I think that if we could have a mechanism where we're partnering with the county and we're going to the Board of Education and saying, if you have all of these programs here, given the people who are coming into the school for that, you're going to stop development. So can we work out an arrangement where you will maybe move a couple of these programs to one of the other high schools? So I'm talking about a partnership, which I believe is a four-way partnership. I think that we have partnership certainly with the city and the county, where we have the same criteria, and then we work with the Board of Education. But I think we should bring the developers into that too. They have big skin in this game, and I think that they should be part of the process. So that's what we were hoping when you went off to talk to Lisa and Alice and everybody, that we were going to come back with, is this legislation can level the playing field, but it isn't going to stop overcrowding at the high school by itself. And so we were looking for a mechanism where we could have a working relationship with all of the entities to make sure that we spread out the programs, spread out the children, don't have anybody over capacity. And as I've said many times before, I went to a high school that was so overcrowded we had to go in 2 shifts, a morning shift and an afternoon shift. I know exactly what it's like to be in an overcrowded high school. I don't think we want that for any reason, let alone stopping development.
I'd like Teresa to elaborate a little bit on our meeting with Arolado, and in the terms of how your experience in the school. Yeah.
So since I guess you all last had a discussion, we did meet with Dr. Arlotto and Alex Shaknovich. And some of the things that we learned in that meeting is there's approximately 210, 220 children who are from outside the Annapolis feeder system. And Annapolis High is right at capacity right now. There are some children that go to other magnet schools that would otherwise go to Annapolis High, but that's only about 29 or 30 kids. So there are significantly more children coming in to Annapolis High than there are children leaving Annapolis High to go to other schools. What we had talked about was if you, well, that was one thing. The second thing was not all residential development generates kids in the school system. And they found that if it was 1 bedroom or less, there was virtually no generation of students from the development. And the county recently passed legislation that exempted some development in the Pearl Town Center area because it was going to be 2 bedrooms or less. So we discussed whether if we were to exclude from the calculation of whether, when you're comparing capacity to enrollment and the impact of the development and whether the high school would be closed or not, would it be appropriate to include those developments that didn't have 2 bedrooms or more because they don't generate any kids? And likewise, we would be making a decision to close Annapolis High based on a decision made by the Board of Education to allow children from outside the feeder system to come into the school system. So if we discussed whether our open-close chart should be based on enrollment versus capacity of children who live in the district, not children from outside the district. So I think That was pretty much our conversations, as I recall.
So we drafted legislation around that to sort of, because I still don't think we're all ready for prime time. We still all agree that this city needs to make allowances for workforce, for younger housing, all those things. How do we address public housing? Does this shut the door to add capacity? I don't think that we have flushed it out enough. This resolution will give us the time to sort of start to flush that out.
Pardon?
Alderwoman Finlayson? Yeah.
There's one more piece to this, talking about mirroring the county. The county has opportunity areas, and there's another name for it, and Alex, I'm sure, used it when you met with him, where they, like the town center and Odington, I think there's 2 or 3 opportunity areas where they do not count towards their capacity. So if we're going to mirror the county's legislation, we should do the same thing, okay? It's really not fair for them to not consider the students coming from the town center, for example, and then we count them towards our numbers. So if we want to mirror the county's legislation, we can't pick and choose what works or what we like. Do it or don't do it at all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Attorney, Alderman Attorney, or no? You're good?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Sorry. So I've got 3 minutes here, so Alderman Annette.
So you said you drafted a resolution or some other legislation?
Linda, what
We have these 2 amendments.
2 amendments, is it? Sorry.
They're amendments.
Oh, it's amendments, all right.
Amendments, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So I would argue, in fact, we can pick and choose, but I don't have a problem if we want to carve out an opportunity area. I think we should discuss it and discuss the impacts of it. But again, I have no problem at all. Where I started off was, we're going to be the same in the city as the criteria in the county. And the county unfortunately bounces around, which is really why I wanted to do it that way. When they change, we would change. And I was told we can't do that in the legislation. We have to specify certain threshold numbers. We can go back to just saying we're like them. That would be very easy.
Who told you that?
Pardon me?
Who told you that?
Office of Law. I won't name names, but Office of Law said you had to put in specific numbers.
So do you mind if we adjourn?
The adjourner has gone.
Huh?
Kevin, will
Move
that
to
be
adjourn.
introduced at the next council meeting?
Yeah.
We need a motion.
Second.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.